Hello, everyone. Like I did with the classic era of Big Brother, which is Big Brother 2 to Big Brother 7, I'm going to rank everyone from the post-classic era of Big Brother, which is from Big Brother 8 to Big Brother 15, and I'm going to put all of them in a Game Players tier ranking based off of the 7 tiers that I have generally used. So that is Abysmal, Bad, Potential, Mediocre, Solid, Good, and Great. I've obviously ranked each of these casts separately, but now that I'm going to combine all of them into this large list, it'll be interesting to see who places where. And for people who appeared on prior eras, so like Mike Boogie and Janelle, I'm going to be discussing all 3 of their runs in this video because the Big Brother 14 renditions are continuations of their journeys in Big Brother. And for people who returned more than once in the era, so like Jesse from Big Brother 10 to Big Brother 11, Jeff and Jordan from 11 and 13, Brittany from 12 and 14, so on and so forth. I'm going to be discussing all their iterations into one placement and one ranking. So when I'm ranking these returnees, I'm going to consider both of their runs. Anyways, let's get to it because I have a lot of people to discuss, so I just want to get right to the point. So at dead last at 105th is Jacob from Big Brother 9. I don't have much to say about him. He decided to go after the sole people in power and to get people to target him, and then refused to defend himself when it came to a house meeting. He would have been safe if he did nothing but pointlessly stirred the pot, and it was all extremely self-induced, since he wasn't even on Parker or Jen's radar before he did this. At 104th is Willie from Big Brother 14. He isn't on the level of a Scott or a Justin, since he at least made it through the first round before getting expelled. At the same time, we did get to see more of his gameplay because he was the first HOH and was abysmal. He initiated an alliance with Frank and immediately broke it. He let the coaches dictate his game, only to rant about it via a house meeting and making people feel uncomfortable. He tried to make the votes really close, and it led to a snowball where Frank called him out. Willie switched his target, and his target ended up staying. Willie didn't even have the willpower to try to fight when he was at the bottom of the house during the second week. At 103rd is Mike from Big Brother 8. I think he's one of the few people who made it through a few rounds who are this low on the list, as he was a third boot and would have lasted at least a bit longer without the infamous move he made. Mike was a part of an alliance called the Mr. and Mrs. Smith Alliance, but the only heavily loyal people to it were himself and Kale, and they were seen as a duo, which is a problem because they had no social capital in the house. Many of the house guests mentioned that he never spoke to them, which is a problem, so it was very easy for them to target him. And what makes it worse is that he wasn't even the initial target for the week, and actively made himself such. Just a really poor performance all around. He had no regrets about anything he did, so I don't think he would learn or grow from his experience if there was another opportunity. At 102nd is Andrew from Big Brother 12. He shocked me with how poor of a player he was, and I always thought he was a bad player from the beginning, so he was just a lot worse. Andrew continuously sketched people out from the very beginning, when people were speculating about who the saboteur was and had a hard time making a bond with his fellow house guests. Andrew was always a backup target for the people who were in power, which is not a good thing, and we saw this happen where he was the pawn of the week on Matt's HOH, but due to Brennan's veto win and Andrew losing his mind, he became the pawn that was sent home. He was better in competitions than what I remembered, but Andrew's just too paranoid and awkward to do well in Big Brother. At 101 is Jen from Big Brother 9. Out of everyone in the season, she came in with the most advantages. She had a boyfriend as a player in the house with her, and it was a secret, so they were partnered with 2 other people, so it could have been an alliance there, but Jen completely mishandled the situation. In addition to that, she was a part of the power couple twist, where she could have used that to make deals with most of the house to protect herself, since she would keep them safe. So she spilled the beans. Her own alliance did not protect her when they were given power, and most of the house just really disliked her. Everything that Jen did in the season was poor, and what makes it worse is that she was initially set up really well. At 100th is Keith from Big Brother 13. He is another person that completely blew it, and it was mainly due to the active work he did. While it was good that he aligned with the newbies and wanted to stick together, he completely shut down any path with the veterans, even faking them would have been better. In addition to that, Keith threw the veto when he was in danger to go home, and worst of all, he alienated and attacked Kalia and Shelly when those were the 2 votes that he needed to stay in the house, and it caused him to be booted out of the house. Keith was just way too paranoid, hyperactive, and should have relaxed, but the fact that he was in an alliance, the vote was close, and he realized his mistakes quickly is why he is higher than the others. I also forgot to mention that he threw the veto while he was on the block, knowing that he was the target. So, yeah. At 99th is Carol from Big Brother 8. It was clear from the beginning that Carol was not a good casting choice, and despite the edit trying to make it look like she wanted to be there, she really did not. She was nominated because she was one of the 2 people who did the poorest in the H2H competition, but she told several people that she did not want to be there and was looking forward to going home. Not only did I think that she didn't have the mental fortitude or motivation to do well in Big Brother, apparently she wasn't close to many of the people on the cast either, so she was struggling socially too, in addition to not really knowing what to do when it came to a strategic lens. I guess what makes her different than the others below her is that she wasn't actively doing things to make things worse for herself, but I don't really see her making it far almost a season, so here she is. At 98th is David from Big Brother 15. I will say that there's a good chance that he isn't the first boot without the MVP twist, since while I don't think it's too unlikely or impossible for McRae to have nominated him on his own. But the thing is, the MVP twist and who was the MVP twist was known to everyone, so it kind of cancelled the unfairness of it. David alienated himself from most of the house during his time on the season, and that's a very easy way to find yourself booted early, as he mainly stuck with Jeremy, Aaron, Caitlyn, and Gina Marie, who essentially had no power. He didn't care to strategize whatsoever and didn't have the capability to do so, and while I could see him being a competitor on other seasons, everything else is just really poor, hence him being here. At 97th is Joe from Big Brother 8. I think he's one of the first, if not the first example of a superfan not doing well in the game, and you being a superfan doesn't mean that you're going to be good at the game. Joe immediately told the entire house that his ex Dustin gave him gonorrhea, aired their dirty laundry out, and got into a fight in front of the house within hours of the season starting. Joe spent most of the time in the season pointlessly stirring the pot for situations that had nothing to do with him when he already lacked ties in the house, with the exception of people like Danielle and Nick. Maybe if he calmed the hell down, he would do better, but I don't know if he has the capability and was an unadaptable train wreck in a short time in the house. At 96th is Annie from Big Brother 12. It seemed like she was someone who had some sort of potential to be a decent enough player, but it never came together well at all. Annie also being the saboteur did not help her whatsoever, since she had to move quicker than the other house guests, in a very slow-moving house, and dynamic, and structure. She sided with Brenchel, who are people who are on the outs in the house and didn't do a good job at adapting. Annie's personality rubbed people the wrong way, and she freaked out when she was nominated. While I do think the twist had a part of her gameplay, I think she loses her top early on most seasons, and I don't think much would change if she were on other seasons. At 95th is Amanda from Big Brother 9. There is so much that I could say about Amanda, but I'm going to keep things short, since I have to briefly talk about everyone in this long era. Amanda and Alex had the first H2H, so they had the best chance at having the power structure around them. They decided to nominate 2 of their allies in Parker and Jen, and didn't get their other allies, Matt and Natalie, who had the veto, to take them off the block. Amanda didn't hide her alliance well at all, and she was annoying everyone in the house, so not only did the house turn against her, but it caused her allies to go home. She was booted right afterwards, and while they almost stayed, it had very little to do with anything she actively did. I don't see Amanda doing better in any other situation or circumstance. At 94th is Jeremy from Big Brother 15. I knew he was a bad player, but was shocking to see how poor of a player he was, since I didn't realize that many people within his alliance mentioned that he was the reason why they flipped from the moving company. Jeremy decided to agitate way too many people, and while he did have some allies, he was not in the majority at all, so it made him a very easy target. Jeremy also bragged about being a competition beast, didn't know when to tone it down, and thought he knew it all. It isn't shocking as soon as the power flipped, he was backdoored, and while he did try to change his tune, it was too transparent and way too late. He also doesn't seem as skilled or having a lot of potential to do better like many others in his archetype, which is why he's lower than most of them. At 93rd is Allison from Big Brother 9. She was given a blessing in the game, and she didn't even realize it, as she was partnered with someone who was in a real-life relationship with someone else, and the person's partner was also a partner with someone else. This means that she could have had a 4-person alliance with herself, Ryan, Parker, and Jen, but she actively made that not a possibility with her actions, and then threatening to reveal it, which caused the cats to get out of the bag. Allison did manage to stay without any of her own doing, or with it having nothing to do with anything she did, and tried to rebuild and work on some friendships, but she still pissed people off, and her flip-floppiness on the second vote caused her to be a target for people who shouldn't even targeted her. I also forgot about the lesbian lie that was never going to add anything positive to her game and was just really dumb. Just really messy, and while she showed more gaming potential than Amanda and Jen, she was equally sloppy and poor socially. At 92nd is JoJo from Big Brother 14. I mentioned in the videos for BB14 that JoJo was definitely screwed over, especially with Willie getting DQ'd right before the nominations happened, where she would not have went home that week otherwise. Even before then, though, JoJo was not acclimating herself well to the house. There was a lot of talk about her being trashy, talkative, and irritating the hell out of the house, so she was not doing well socially. In addition to all of that, Brittany did not get along with her, and she was JoJo's coach, in addition to not being in any notable alliances, and didn't have much strategy. JoJo didn't really listen to other people's advice, kept on saying I know to everything, and it was clear that she was out of her depth with Big Brother and the cast. I don't really see her improving much on any other season, or having the awareness to know where to improve, hence her being here. I guess her high ceiling would be to be a Gina Marie, but as we know, I don't think highly of Gina Marie as a player. At 91st is Lawan from Big Brother 13. Of course, Lawan is mainly known for volunteering to not just be nominated, but evicted, because he thought that he would get some superpowers when he returned. That is abysmal, and that alone would have gotten him on this tier, but he has a lot of other reasons as to why he's down on this tier. One of them is that he got into the Regulators Alliance, which was the worst alliance of all time, as they were all evicted right away, and even though he was one of the safer newbies, the fact that he was not immediately targeted, despite that, he wasn't in a good position at all. He did not acclimate himself with the other veterans, so they had no use for him, and the other newbies like Shelly, Adam, and Clea, who also had struggle relationships with other people, saw him as expendable. His options are either getting booted early or getting dragged to the end, and then with him choosing to be evicted and his plan failing to cost him to come back, it earned him a spot here. At 90th is Ashley from Big Brother 14. I think she's the first person who is a juror who showed up on this list, and it means that I think she's the worst player from this era who made it to the jury phase. In general, that most definitely is very fitting. Anyways, Ashley was kept out of the power structure pertaining to the gameplay dynamics of the season from the very beginning of the season, so she never really put much effort into getting involved in the game dynamics, making alliances with people, or forming many relationships with people. She did have that weird romance with Ian and the showmance with Frank, but neither of them took her seriously as an ally. Her closest allies were Will and seemingly Jen, but they had no power, and she was clueless about anything that happened in the house. You would think that she would be a goat that would strike to the end, but her association with Frank and people just having no use for her caused her to be booted as the first juror. I don't even think she knows where to start pertaining her flaws and where to start to cause her to improve as a player, which is an issue in itself. At 89th is Jen from Big Brother 8. It's not shocking that Jen is right above her real-life friend in Ashley. Jen is also someone who made it to the jury portion of the season, which is why she's higher than most of the others on this tier, who are mainly pre-jurors. From the very beginning, Jen rubbed people the wrong way with her behavior, actions, and interactions with people, and it didn't seem like she even cared to see why people have a negative opinion on her, so she could fix it. Most of the house was actively targeting her, but then she was able to win the Week 2 HOH, and she didn't use that to improve her position whatsoever. Luckily for Jen, she kept on winning her way to safety as she won vetoes in Week 3 and 5, and made sure that Jamaica kept the veto in Week 4, so she could be vetoed. At the same time, it is possible that she could have went home in those 3 weeks without those wins. The Donatos realized that they need her as a number, so they made a truce with her. But when they got a new alliance, Danielle backdoored her. Jen did not handle it well, and while she had a solid read here or there, she really needed to win out to get to where she was, had an abysmal social game, and didn't really have a solid alliance. And I don't know if the self-awareness is there for her to improve. So here she is. The final person in this tier at 88th is Frank from Big Brother 14. And to finalize this era, we have to go with the competition beast of Frank. While the edit seemingly tried to cover it to the best of their ability, Frank's main issue is that his social game was abysmal, which is why most of the house was targeting him from the beginning. He decided to stick himself to Mike Boogie like glue, and the two of them would just bag in their negativity together while thinking that they are in a much better position than they were. Frank was close to going home in the first week, and it was really blowing up that caused him to stay. He was able to win several other HOHs over the course of the season, and some vetoes as well, where he showed how great of a competitor he was. The issue with Frank is that whenever he was not in power, via an HOH, he was nominated and then had to veto himself. Outside of the first vote, he only survived the block because he was next to Janelle, and his eviction in the third week was cancelled, so he had the privilege of his eviction being stopped by outside of his control. For someone to get 7th place and was either nominated or HOH is really bad. And Frank always took people's words to heart and by face value too much, when the people proved that they could not be trusted time and time beforehand. With all that in mind, it makes sense why he is here. So the first person in this tier at 87th is Stephen from Big Brother 10. From what I recall, he was immediately on the outs in the house since he didn't feel like speaking to certain people, and the people he was close to were on their way out, like Brian for example. When Jesse won HOH, he didn't even bother going into the HOH room, and it didn't seem like he had much strategy. I remember him complaining to get Libra on the block, and Keisha was one of the only people he was close to, or he was even somewhat aligned to, though they weren't technically aligned, and Angie left him out to dry. He then either whined about his situation or was very paranoid when he did campaign, and the social skills just wasn't there. I don't have a good feeling about his prospects if he were to return, and he didn't show anything positive, and in the social game, he struggled with that element and adapting in general. At 86th is Monet from Big Brother 12. A lot of people mentioned that she had no strategy in the house, so either she had absolutely no strategy, or that's how she came off, which isn't a good thing either way. She was close to Brittany and seemingly was close to Kathy, but she focused too much on the catty drama with Brenchel and didn't see the bigger picture. Of course she was expendable to the house, despite supposedly having something with Enzer, or that was the plan, but when she was nominated, she completely spiraled and none of her plans worked. It just seemed like she didn't know how to adapt and was too emotional to handle the stress of the game. I don't think she knew where she went wrong, and I don't think she has the awareness to learn where she went wrong so she could improve as a player. At 85th is Zach from Big Brother 8. It's interesting that a third place player and someone who's the biggest threat out of the final 3 ended up being not only being in the bad tier, but being so low on the list. But when you look at his game and skill set, it makes sense. Zach was in an alliance called Mr. and Mrs. Smith Alliance, and it was a horrible alliance, because not only were they completely transparent about their alliance, but they had no social and strategic hold in the game. The alliance was exposed very quickly, and they were wiped out with the exception of Zach. His main flaw is that his social game was abysmal, where for weeks people went out of their way to walk out of conversations with him, and to walk out of rooms with him, and to avoid him as much as possible, and people legitimately disliked him. Even despite that, people were still actively targeting him throughout the season, and he was always a backup target. He was kind of just coasting, and then was brought in as a number by the Donatos, enabling them for several weeks, while also trying to play a bad rat game, and missed an opportunity in the Final 5 to boot them, only to attempt to do so in the Final 4, but it was too late. Zach was the least hated out of the 3, but damn near everyone else beats him, and they were rooting against him. In addition to that, Zach had an inflated sense of entitlement and ego when no one respected him in the house and he didn't really make any moves. At 84th is Brayden from Big Brother 11. The Athletes and the Brains Alliance saw him as a threat, and Brayden had a good relationship with his side of the house. It seemed like he wasn't a target at the beginning, but once he was nominated, he completely blew it, as he snapped at Lydia and Kevin, which could have been votes to keep him in the house, and decided to be a racist, which caused even more people to turn away from him. Despite that, it was a tie vote to get him to go. Brayden didn't show much about his strategic game, and he was too emotional, which caused him to not stay when he probably could have stayed, and he's still a first boot, who didn't seem like he had bigger potential. At 83rd is Cassie from Big Brother 13. It has been discussed in the fandom that she got a very good edit on the show, since she was not doing well socially at all. Outside of the fact that she did not get along with most of the veterans, she also had conflicts with newbies like Kalia and Porsche, and this conflict caused her to be very tunnel visioned in the game. Cassie got herself into the worst alliance ever, called the Regulators Alliance, and while they almost got their way on the first vote, Keith's actions drove away 2 votes that she needed, and they needed. There really wasn't much strategically there from Cassie that showed that she could get herself out of tough jams, and she ended up whining and complaining about the position she was in, claiming that the women were jealous of her because she was a pretty female, which was not the case. I don't see Cassie doing better on other seasons, not only because she wasn't a fan of the show to begin with, but she has to realize that her poor play and personality is why she was in the position she was in. I don't see the potential of growth, so outside of what she did in the game, I feel like putting her here is a good spot for her. At 82nd is Howard from Big Brother 15. His journey in the season was very unfortunate due to the blatant racism that happened in the season, which was of course going to affect him severely in the house. You can see the energy just shift and how it really affected him. Outside of that, Howard did make some mistakes in the game, like constantly lying about being in the moving company even after two of the members already exposed it. It was good that he was a part of the alliance and was making other relationships with other people, but he was given the opportunity to flip when it became clear that his alliance was done, but he refused to do so. Outside of that, and then lying about his alliance, he lost the trust of many people and never did much work to actively repair those relationships. He was not good at the competitions, wasn't a good or notable strategist, and had a hard time getting his thoughts across to people in the way that he intends them to get across, in addition to not being adaptable whatsoever. At 81st is Kale from Big Brother 8. She definitely had a tough run during her time on the season, but despite her archetype, Kale shocked people at first. She was able to win the first HOH, so it gave her the opportunity to build a structure around her that will carry her fall. Kale did try that, but she chose the wrong allies for the Mr. and Mrs. Robertson's alliance, and the alliance not only blew up, but they outright left her hanging with the second vote. But that was partially due to her pushing hard to boot Dick when no one wanted that. She made her entire alliance very obvious, which is why she was in the position to begin with, and Kale could not adapt. She was always the initial target or the backup target, but they decided to backdoor Nick and Mike, which spared her, but her position actually, never changed. In her final week, Kale was truly the pawn, but due to several mistakes of the Donato's, she ended up being booted right before Jerry. I don't think she has the capability to adapt, have a good social strategic game, or to calm her emotions, as she was very emotional as well. At 80th is Ronnie from Big Brother 11. If anyone talks about a pre-Joey flameout on Big Brother, Ronnie is usually the one of the first people who come up. He was in a prime position throughout the first week, since he was able to start the Brains plus Bronze alliance, and the other side of the house trusted him to vote with them. Of course, he was going to piss off one side of the house, but he could have worked through that, since many people in his position has come out of that in a better position, and the other side were willing to overlook it. The main mistake that Ronnie made was that he won HOH, and you don't win HOH when you're in the middle, and then he started threatening people, making it clear that he was the rogue vote. But he continued lying about it, even when the other side were willing to move on from it. Ronnie's spot was blown up to the entire house, and while the Jesse side took him in, there was dissension in that side of the house, and Russell didn't like that his allies chose Ronnie over him, and the other side hasn't forgot about what Ronnie did, so he was the final pre-juror. Just too messy for his own doing, and while he has some positives, this is a good spot for him. At 79th is Kathy from Big Brother 12. It seems like her spot in the game was going to be someone who's dragged to the end as a goat, but as we know, this didn't end up happening. At the same time, she was really targeted throughout the season, and was always the alternate target. She was actually the main target at some point during Matt's HOH, and when Brennan won the veto, people were planning on booting her. Luckily for her, she remained calm on the block, while Andrew blew himself out of the house. Kathy didn't have any notable alliances whatsoever, and had relationships with some other women, but they all went early. Kathy was sent home to the Diamond Power of Veto, and while she was screwed, she didn't have a chance to win, and I don't think she has the capability to do better at the game. She is also infamously poor in competitions, so that's another negative on her as well. At 78th is Lydia from Big Brother 11. I didn't know what I thought of Lydia as a player before this, but I was kind of shocked with how poor of a player I realized she was. Lydia was genuinely trying to get in good with Jesse, but he and his allies saw her as someone who was disingenuous, so it caused her to be targeted, but she would have been saved by the other side in the vote. Lydia ended up burning that other side by selling Brayden out, but she was a part of the Jesse group. After that, she was at the bottom of that alliance, and caused a lot of dissension with Natalie, who was in a better position in that alliance, and it seemed like she tried to be a floater, a very bad one, whenever she was pissed off, so people saw through her game, and she almost went home by her own alliance during the fourth week. She was strategically messy, her position was poor throughout the entire season, and was really poor in competitions, and while she was kind of affected by the coup, it wasn't directly, and she didn't have a chance to win the game anyways. At 77th is Alyssa from Big Brother 15. It was clear that Alyssa was stunt casting because of her connection to Brenchel, and I don't know if the stunt casting was worth it for them by the end. Alyssa hiding her relationship with her sister and brother-in-law rubbed the house guests the wrong way, and in addition to that, her personality just rubbed people the wrong way, where she was a huge target during the first 2 weeks. If she did not win the MVP and the house realizing that they could weaponize it, she would have gone home in one of the first 2 evictions. After that, she did blend in with the house and was a part of the majority alliance, but she was at the bottom of the alliance, where she didn't do much to change her position in the game. Even during the weeks where she was safe, she was pissing off a lot of people due to her attitude, whining and complaining to production, and acting like she was privileged. It seemed like she woke up once Helen was evicted and was the first to make a move to target Miranda, but it was just too late. Alyssa could win some comps, but she wasn't the strongest in them, and wasn't good strategically or socially, where she would be an early boot on most seasons, in my opinion. At 76th is Laura from Big Brother 11. She was another one who disappointed me when rewatching the season, since many people act like she's this robbed goddess with potential, but I don't really see it like that. Laura bragged about how much she knew about the game, and she was struggling with bonding with people in the beginning, when she was almost nominated the first week. She kissed up to the Jesse side of the house, but was then very transparent with not actually being with them, and she was not very high up on the totem pole with the Jeff and Jordan side of the house either. Laura also vocalized how much she did not trust Ronnie right after he won HOH, and was a dead woman walking in her final week. I do think she knows the game and can be perceptive, but she talks too much, is too transparent, and people saw her as very fake, and I don't know if she has the ability to improve. At 75th is Casey from Big Brother 11. He is kind of similar to Laura, since apparently he kissed up to the Jesse side of the house to avoid being nominated, but did not maintain that relationship, or the relationships with the other side, and lied about who he was voting out, so he was on their bad side. Casey got closer to the Jeff and Jordan side of the house, and made it known how much he did not trust Ronnie, which he could focus on for the rest of his time in the house. Casey was close in many competitions, so he had that going for him, but it was also why he was backdoored, which he did not see coming, and no one really cared when it happened. Casey mentioned that his big issue is that he takes people for their word too much, and he wasn't doing great socially or strategically, so he's on the higher end of the bad tier. At 74th is Joe from Big Brother 14. I really don't want to discuss him much, since I just don't care overall. Apparently, he made several alliances with the people in the house, and while it's a good idea in theory, people of course caught on and compared notes, so he was put in a tough position in the beginning due to this. Even within his own team, Joe was an outsider, and I could imagine some of his antics were a part of it. Joe also talked way too much, was way too transparent with everything he did, so it made people distrust him, and he was not in the structure of the strategic or even social dynamics of the house. He was nominated a few times and was carried along as a goat of some sorts, but he ended up being booted in the double as a pawn who went home. He was poor strategically, poor socially, poor competitively, and people didn't respect him because they thought he was in the house to promote his cooking career. At 73rd is Gina Marie from Big Brother 15. It's clear that she was cast mainly for her personality and not for any gameplay potential or as a winner contender. Gina Marie did have an alliance with the Aaron and Caitlyn side of the house, but they were in the immediate minority, and it was mainly due to their own behavior, causing her to be blindsided with the first 2 votes. She did not handle this well at all, but people did not respect her or see her as a threat, so they left her alone and targeted her allies instead. But in the middle weeks of the season, she was left out of the alliance that Aaron was being pulled into and was thrown out there as an alternate target a few times. Gina Marie played personally whenever she was in power and was just a number when she was brought into the Exterminators alliance. She could not explain her game at the end because she did not really know what she was doing, was poor strategically, and got into a lot of drama, so she wasn't good socially, and I only remember her doing well in physical competitions, so she's not even diverse in the type of competitions that she can win. I see her getting dragged along more often than not, and she isn't as self-destructive, which is why she is higher on this tier. At 72nd is Joshua from Big Brother 9. He was someone that I was kind of ambivalent to pertaining my thoughts on him as a player, but then I rewatched the season, and I was less and less impressed with him as a player. It seemed like he as well as Sharon were close to James and Chelsea from the beginning, but they didn't have any numbers in the beginning. It seemed like he was close to Allison throughout the early weeks, but because of the vote flip mess in the second week, he decided to gun for her, where there was an entire other side of the house that needed to be handled first. After that, overplaying in the next week, trying to get Natalie to turn on Matt, and he and his alliance trying to backdoor Matt, caused for his alliance to be at the bottom of the house for the remainder of the season. His deal with Ryan was a good idea, and maintaining it was good, but he was poor strategically, kind of inconsistent socially, and didn't really take much accountability for his game, always mentioning that he was provoked, so I don't even know if he has the ability to improve. And also, trying to replicate Evil Dick is never a good idea. At 71st is James from Big Brother 9. From the very beginning, it seemed like James was kind of struggling to find his place, and while he had some allies like Joshua and Sharon, he didn't really do much when he was in power. While splitting up Amanda, Alex, Stanley, and Matt was good, he didn't use this HOH to gain more allies. He was a part of the plot to backdoor Matt, and not having much social relationships bit him in the butt, causing him to be evicted. James was given the opportunity to be brought back in the house, which always docks people in my eyes, and it docked him. And he essentially went out from his return because he had to. James continuously broke his word to people and felt justified in doing so, but would never get why he was facing the repercussions of his moves while whining about people not owing him anything, and was whining about how people always treated him wrong and targeting him. James kept on losing allies, mainly due to his own gameplay, and the social game as well as the strategic game was not good. Accountability is clearly not a thing that James showed once throughout the season, so I don't see how he can improve as a player. At 70th is Brendan from Big Brother 12 and Big Brother 13. I was curious about where I would end up with him as a player before rewatching his seasons, but after his baby experience concluded, it was clear to me that he's just a bad player overall. He isolated himself with Rachel from early on and didn't bond with many people throughout the season, but the few people he had connections with, in Andrew and Annie, were turned off by his relationship. Brendan was reliant on himself or his partner winning competitions, and he saved himself from being a week 3 boot by winning the veto. Brendan had this arrogant, confrontational attitude throughout the entire season and was more focused with getting back at people than being strategic. I thought there was some potential for him to be better if he was on another season, since he at least acknowledged that they needed more allies, and they had to be calm to attract more people to them. And he was a lot more calmer and adaptable when Rachel was gone. But that was clearly not true, since he came back in Big Brother 13 more arrogant, pompous, and entitled as well. He rubbed a lot of the newbies the wrong way, didn't bring in any additional allies, kept on ranting about floaters, only talking about the game in a competitive level, and found himself to be booted pre-jury, and was lucky to have even came back, knocking him some more. He stuck with his alliance when he came back, did nothing to improve, and was evicted as soon as he came back. Brendan is good at competitions, but is lacking in the strategy, adaptability, self-interest, and social game, so he is at around the top of this tier in my opinion. And the final person in this tier at 69th is Rachel from Big Brother 12 and Big Brother 13. I think she's the first winner to make it on this list, and it's very fitting. Rachel just is not a good Big Brother player, and I think based on her skills solely, she's a bad one. Maybe she would be different if she returns now, since it's been over a decade, but I doubt it. Her social game was atrocious on Big Brother 12, as most of the house disliked her. She pissed off the few people that liked her boyfriend, preventing them from working with her and Brendan, and she never even attempted to blend in socially with the other house guests. There was only one round out of 5 where she was not HOH or nominated, and that was week 3. She had to win HOH every week to make it as far as she did, and made personal nominations both times instead of creating a good structure around herself and Brendan, and then was evicted the first chance they got. In her next season, she really didn't improve much at all. Of course, there was many benefits that she had as a veteran, like the twist going in her favor, but she was able to make relationships with people like Porsche and had allies in the other veterans. But she still rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, made a lot of personal choices when it comes to her moves, and once again had to rely on competitions, but not as much as Big Brother 12. If she does not have the competitions on her side, Rachel is booted early, and I don't have faith in a strategic or social game to carry her, especially without twists. The first person in this tier at 68 is Jodie from Big Brother 14. I really had no choice but to put her here, as she was the first of the day 1 to 2 boots, which we will see many times in the new era, or in the next era, my bad, and she was out because she lost a physical competition and Dan chose favorites. We know nothing about her strategic ability, so I can't even rank her regarding that, and while I think she always struggles in the Big Brother 14 cast, I could see her doing better on other seasons. At 67th is Angie from Big Brother 10. From what I remembered, a lot of the house guests actually liked her through the season, so I don't think she was horrible socially, as the only people who really disliked her were Keisha, Libra, and April. Unfortunately for her, They were the ones that were in power, and she didn't have a good poker face. At the same time, she also decided to align herself with the sinking ship with Brian, and while I give her credit for successfully pivoting in the second week, something that Steven failed to do, as she was able to get into an alliance with Memphis, Jesse, and Michelle, it showed that she can adapt, and I think she would do better on other seasons, especially those that aren't chaotic like Big Brother 10. At 66 is Brian from Big Brother 10. It's weird for me to put a first boot on here regarding this tier, but it was clear that Brian had some promise. Apparently, he only watched Big Brother 7 before joining Big Brother, and that season is such an anomaly. He clearly had a grasp for strategy with having some loyal allies and then having other side alliances and deals. His issue was he put 3 to 5 weeks of gameplay within a week and people caught onto it. Brian did seem to acknowledge his mistakes and was very self-aware regarding it, so I could see him improving on another season, and he also had pretty good social skills. I have no idea about how he would adapt in competitions, or do in competitions, since he never played one on the season. At 65th is Nick from Big Brother 8. I find him to be a pretty weird one, since there wasn't a whole lot there strategically for him, since he mentioned that he didn't care too much about the game and actively focused on his showmans, mentioning that he would leave for other people, though he did kind of mention that he wanted to float, but he didn't really execute that. But the thing is, he actually was in a good position, since he was in the Mr. and Mrs. Robinson's alliance, but was the only person in that alliance who had any sort of social game, since a lot of people on the other side really liked him. I think he was very good socially, from the little we saw, and could have just focused on that, but he was too focused on the showmans, and then there was the AFP stuff that eventually got him out of the house. I think if he was on another season, and just focused on the social game, and deciding to focus on the strategic elements of the game, I think he could do well. At 64th is Nick from Big Brother 15. Ironic that I put the two Nicks back to back, and I think they actually have the opposite strengths and issues. I discussed the other one, but this Nick's main strength was his concept for a strategy. He had a good idea of building a solid alliance and having side pieces, so they could control the numbers. Unfortunately for him, there was the MVP twist, and while he was good with half of the house, he completely ignored the other half of the house, and they're the ones who ended up in power, or they had the votes. So I think there are some holes with his social game. He couldn't even lie well to Alyssa when she gave him the opportunity to save himself by saying that he wouldn't target her. I think he could do well in other seasons, and he wouldn't have even been up on the block that week without the MVP twist, so I have to take that into consideration. At 63rd is Kara from Big Brother 14. She is a weird one, since I believe her eviction is one of the few evictions in Big Brother history that has nothing to do with the actual evictee, meaning her. Due to the coaches' twist and the coaches making it clear who were their favorite players or the most valuable players, she was Dan's favorite player, and people wanted to weaken him by getting rid of her. There was a back and forth about who to keep between her and Frank the entire week, and she ended up going home due to Willie screwing up with his HOH with his behavior and failing to get Frank out. She mentioned that she was too passive as she was listening to Dan's advice when she wanted to do more campaigning, and people didn't really say anything bad about her. At the same time, she is kind of improving, so I don't know how she would do if she was a more active player. So with all that put together, I put her in this tier. At 62nd is Parker from Big Brother 9. He is one of the two main people who were affected by the Paris twist in Big Brother 9, but even despite that, I don't think he would have been a good or a great player. Production decided to pair him up with Jen, knowing that her boyfriend Ryan had an issue with interracial relationships, and he was a very chaotic player as previously discussed. It caused his own alliance to target him, as he was very close to Matt, Alex, and Amanda, and they mentioned how it sucked. At the same time, he was very confrontational, but people mentioned that they liked him, and he was one of the few Big Brother fans in that house. He would most likely do better on other seasons, but I don't see him being an upper tier player, but he was booted due to a twist, so here he is. At 61st is Alex from Big Brother 9. I talked about one person who was screwed over by the Paris twist, and Alex is the other one, so it's fitting that he's here right behind Parker. Like Parker, I don't think he would have been a good or a great player, even if he were a solo player. But I think he would have done much better if he was on his own or on a different season. The house guests in Big Brother 9 liked him a lot and felt bad about evicting him, and they also mentioned that they would have voted him back in the house over James if they knew that the mystery house guest was him. At the same time, he had some noticeable flaws, where he played very emotionally at times and made his alliance with Matt way too visible, in addition to just botching his HOH. All of that causes for him to be ranked around here on my list. At 60th is Will from Big Brother 14. He is someone that is pretty easy to forget, but when you look at his journey on Big Brother 14, it's clear that he has some perceptive skills, as he was one of the few who clearly saw what the veterans were doing and wasn't blinded by any of them, to be honest. But for some reason, people saw him as Janelle's strongest player, and I believe it's because Joe and Ashley were just so weak, so people were always going to target him first. I don't remember him doing well or being notable in any competition, and I do think that he overestimated his abilities and position, which caused for him to be targeted, and he was also never in the majority alliance. And when Frank is winning safety every week or every other week, and that was the quote-to-quote other side of the house, Will had nowhere to hide. In general, he is mainly here because I didn't know where else to put him. At 59th is Caitlyn from Big Brother 15. When you look at her journey, you would think that she should not be on this tier, as she was in the minority alliance the entire time she was on Big Brother. At the same time, I do think the MVP twist affected her alliance, especially on the second week where her ally was HOH, but it was a lot about their behavior that put her in this predicament. After her alliance blew up, she did decide to make relationships with people, and a lot of them did prefer her over her allies. Unfortunately for Caitlyn, she didn't make strong relationships with the right people, meaning Helen, Andy, and Miranda, who decided to evict her over Aaron. People tend to forget how good she was in competitions, and she had some sense of self-reflection compared to her allies, so here she is. At 58th is Kristen from Big Brother 12. She got a pretty bad edit on her season, mainly because she wasn't really present on the show until her last week in the season. Kristen obviously had her showmance with Hayden, but it seemed like a lot of the brigade members liked her, and she had a lot of connections with people on the other side. Apparently, what caused her downfall was that she was making deals with people that she couldn't really keep, and Andrew was just way too much of a loose cannon because he felt neglected by her. She was the only person who solely figured out the Brigade Alliance during the season and predicted the rest of the season to the house guest, so she's very perceptive. At the same time, I do think she gets too stubborn and emotional for her own liking, like how she reacted during the first day after Rachel won HOH. At 57th is Dominic from Big Brother 13. If anyone hasn't noticed, he's a lot higher than all of his allies of the Regulators Alliance, and it's because he's the only one I feel like has some sort of potential or promise or a ceiling. He was the only one who realized that you need to at least pretend to be in good with the veterans, and of course he was close to Danielle, which was a good move, since she was doing her best to protect him. He had a good head on his shoulders and was good in competitions, where he was also pretty good socially. During his final week, it seemed like there was a good chance he would stay in the game, but Danielle's messy gameplay caused the house to realize that he needs to go. I feel like if he was not handicapped due to the duo's twist and in another season or situation, I think he would do a lot better as a player. At 56th is Jesse from Big Brother 15. It is very rare for me to put people in this tier that made the jury phase, and I only do it for people who are just all over the place or I can't feel right placing them in any other tier. With Jessie, she definitely fits the latter, but when it comes to what she did in the season, it kind of makes sense. Jessie knew that she was at the bottom of the Caitlyn and Aaron crew, so she rightfully flipped from them, which is something that a majority of house guests in her position don't do. Once she became the bottom of the Amanda and Andy crew, she attempted to make moves to dismantle that power structure so she could be in a better position. Jessie was actually a lot more self-interested than I realized over the years, and it's a very good and respectable trait. The issue with Jessie is that her social game was not strong, and many people were annoyed with her, so she did not have the influence to make any sort of moves. I could see her doing better in other environments that aren't as toxic, and the casts are more self-interested, but I could see her being an early boot on other seasons. And the final person in this tier at 55th is Candace. So she follows Jessie in being a juror who I feel like is all over the place, to the point where I don't feel like I can put her in any other tier. Candace's main skill set is that she's extremely perceptive, as she picked up that there was a guys' alliance and told the right people about it, where they were fully able to stop that alliance and flip the house in their favor. Despite that, Candace was never able to get into a power position for a few reasons. One, she was not good at competitions, so she couldn't win power, and two, there's a lot of racism in the house, which would obviously affect her ability to do a lot. At the same time, a lot of people just didn't care for her in the game, and I don't know if that would change if she was in a more diverse cast, and you can tell that a part of her was checked out. And like Jessie, she was just always on the bottom of the house, so there's only so much she can do. But she was always willing to make a move against the power, so props to her. The first person in the mediocre tier is Mike Boogie from Big Brother 2, Big Brother 7, and Big Brother 14. It's very clear that he played a bad game on Big Brother 2. No way around it. He became the first HOH because people liked him socially, and he made a good first impression. But that wore off by the end of his reign, where a lot of the house disliked him and voted the opposite of how he wanted to, as a sign to him that they aren't here for his strategy or personality. Getting into a showmatch with Krista gave him and his alliance an additional week, but his time was limited after that, and he had no self-preservation, where he rejected Hardy's deal. And when he was on the block, he whined about saving Kent in the first week, feeling like the latter should be obligated to keep him around, and didn't even bother campaigning to stay in the house. Luckily for him, he was able to watch the game evolve before he returned in Big Brother 7 and came in with a different mindset, where he is willing to lie, backstab, use his social skills, and laid under the radar when he needed to. Mike supported a lot of Will's moves, made his connections, won some competitions here and there, and played a very high-profile game, which the cast appreciated. While he did improve a lot, he did benefit by being the smallest target in the house and having Will guide him, but it's not because he wasn't playing a winning game for himself. I think Mike Boogie playing without Will was able to kind of neutralize him, especially with his All-Star season being aided by Will when he wasn't really equipped to be on the season to begin with. He really did not intend on being a player in Big Brother 14, and you definitely saw some of the cliquish, bro-ish mentality that we saw in Big Brother 2, as Frank kind of brought that side out of him even more. He did have some decent moves, showed that he wasn't awful strategically, but he really needed the guidance of a better player, and let his personality get in the way. Combining all of his seasons, I think he's a pretty middling player who can have some high highs but has a bit more lows and is relatively inconsistent overall. At 53rd is Rennie from Big Brother 10. Honestly, I can't say that Rennie really played poorly, but I can't say that she played well. She did put a huge target on herself during the first day with being loud and arguing with Jesse publicly, but after all that took place and died down, people seemingly left her alone. Rennie really wasn't in any alliance during the first half of the season, as the house saw her as a flirter that they might boot pre-jury to have a fun jury, but the Jesse flip put her in a majority alliance. She was with Dan, Memphis, and Keisha, but Rennie was always at the bottom of that alliance, and how she handled her HOH made everyone look at her worse as a player, and she showed her alliance that they are expendable, and she was the first person booted from her alliance. She can be intuitive, but not strategic, not really good at competitions, and is all over the place socially. On most seasons, she'd be an early boot or dragged to the end. At 52nd is Jerry from Big Brother 10. I feel like he's not much different from Rennie as a player, since he was seen as a flirter that most of the house mentioned that they could get rid of pre-Jerry to have a fun Jerry face, but no one was actually going to follow through with it. He did have an alliance with Brian, who was using him, but let the entire house force him to break his word, so Jerry is seen as untrustworthy from the beginning. Once the Jerry face started, he was lumped in with April, Ollie, and Michelle, but I don't think they saw him as a legit ally, and he was pawned for the rest of the season. One thing Jerry has in his corner is his ability to win competitions, which you wouldn't expect from someone his age, but it gave him some sort of agency in the main happenings of the season. I will say that his social game was extremely poor, as he was arguably the most volatile and immature person in the entire season, causing a lot of the cast to not respect him. He's an early boot or drag to the end on most seasons. At 51st is Erin from Big Brother 15. It disgusts me that she's even this high, though she's really on the lower end of the mediocre tier. Erin was horrible in the beginning pertaining to her social game, as she was the catalyst of Winegate, kept on trashing and whining about the others, and sulked about her position in the game. Once she got over that though, she kissed butt to the people who were in power, and it caused her to get into the power alliance, which is something that Caitlyn and Gina Marie failed to do. After getting this power, she let herself get manipulated and gave away all of her power to nominate who her allies wanted to nominate, while complaining to everyone about it. Erin was good in competitions, as she won 4 HOHs despite getting 8th place, so that put her up here. Despite all of her foul behavior, it did seem like her social game improved, so I can't say she was horrible the entire way. All that is why she is in this tier and not lower, though I really wanted to put her lower. At 50th is Adam from Big Brother 13. What I will say about Adam is that he knows how to pivot, especially when the other side is either losing or has lost power, so I think that's a skill I will give him that many others don't have. Adam was a superfan and was cast to essentially aid the vets, and while he could pivot, he more often than not always went back to the veterans, partially because he liked them more, or he was sloppy with trying to flip to the other side, so he came back. Adam won a few competitions, but I don't think he was reliant on them, or it's something that I will say he's particularly good at. At the same time, his social game was not as good as he thought it was. No one in the house respected him as a player, and he had a warped view on how people saw him, as though he was this huge player, when he just was not. I don't see him being an early boot on most seasons, but I don't ever really see him as being a threat to win. At 49th is Ollie from Big Brother 10. He was actually in a very good position in the first week, since he was aligned with Brian and Dan, while also being in good with the Coven woman, but he panicked when the latter called him out on his alliance, causing the house to boot Brian. It wouldn't have been bad enough, especially since an alliance of 8 was formed afterwards, which was very loose. But what happened was that he kind of just followed April through the rest of the season. Many of the house guests mentioned that he didn't speak game to them at all, and while he was an inoffensive house guest compared to his cast, I wouldn't say that his social game was really thriving. I only remember him doing well on the Endurance HOH, so I can't even say that he would be good at competitions on a consistent basis. I don't ever really see him as an early boot on most seasons, and I could see him lasting long, but I don't really see any good skills of his, so he is relatively in the middle. At 48th is Jen from Big Brother 14. I don't really have much to say about her. Jen was an expendable member of the Boogie team during the coach's phase of the game, though she was apparently closer to Janelle's players, who are also expendable and frozen out of the strategy. People kind of just didn't pay her any mind for over half of the season, and she was kind of aligned with Frank by necessity once the jury phase started, and was convinced to save Den. She was booted because Ian wanted to remain loyal to the Alliance, so she did fine enough as an outsider the entire season. Unlike Joe, she was more social and more respected, so I guess that's a positive for her. I don't remember her doing well in most of the competitions, and the strategy kind of just wasn't there, so she's just okay. In general, I can see her repeating this trajectory if she was on most other seasons. At 47th is Jordan from Big Brother 11 and Big Brother 13. She's someone who I feel like is going to be extremely consistent no matter what season she is on. Jordan is never someone who's going to be much of a strategist and is taken very far in the seasons because she's extremely unintimidating and unthreatening, so people see booting her as a waste of an HOH. In Big Brother 11, she did try to save Brayden, but took a more passive approach for the rest of the season and became a pawn when her allies were booted early on. The coup d'etat didn't save her, since she was not close to going home around that point in the future, but it did put herself and Jeff in a power position that might not have happened without it. Jordan won a few competitions and was able to take out Kevin while sitting against Natalie, who was more hated. While she was an underdog on her first season, her game didn't change at all in her second season, as she was in a vet alliance the entire season, and it was hers and Jeff's social games that caused them to gain those newbie numbers. Jordan was checked out in the season and mainly played so Jeff could win, and she also wanted to be booted over him in Big Brother 11, so it shows that she doesn't really have the instinct and the willpower, but she was also taken far because she was unthreatening and could have won BB13 because of the vets. Despite that, I don't think she's very good socially, since she mainly tends to stick with her side and group of people while feeling entitled. I think she's since a bad player, but not really good, so her skill sets has her in the mediocre tier. At 46th is Chelsea from Big Brother 9. I remember during the season that there wasn't much to discuss about her as a player. From what I could tell, she was aligned with the likes of Sharon and Joshua from the beginning, but she did get into that nasty fight with Amanda that brought a bit too much attention to herself. It seemed like James was the one that was obsessed with Operation Condor, while she was the one that insisted on Matt and Natalie getting booted, but she didn't get her way. Of course, Chelsea got into a showmance with James, which was ultimately her downfall, since they would nominate her beside him, and with her being the weaker competitor, she would get booted. Chelsea was on the outs with the majority of the house from the beginning, and they didn't really like her attitude, and I forgot to mention that she would have went home week 4 had she not won the veto, since she had little ties when they went to the individual phase. Not really a bad player, but not a good player overall, and it's just okay in competitions. At 45th is Ryan from Big Brother 9. A part of me wanted to put Ryan higher, since he was negatively affected by the twist, because Allison was such a horrible partner, and the target on them, especially after Jen left, was mainly due to her. At the same time, he had a huge advantage with his real-life girlfriend being in the game, and them having different partners, so that could have been an alliance there. The thing is, they completely blew that opportunity. Ryan was relatively well-liked in the beginning of the season, but things started to change once he actually gained power, since people saw him as wishy-washy, especially his first HOH with the whole match situation, and they saw him as a follower. Ryan won a decent amount of competitions, so he was good in that element, and was only a member to Team Christ, but he ended up playing for Adam's game, as he handled the final 3 rounds extremely poorly, and he never really had his own agency. In addition to that, he was evicted, and was given the chance to come back, where it turned into a solo eviction between one of himself and Allison, so I docked him for that. Overall, he's just a relatively meh player, but I see him making it to jury on almost any season he is on and has a chance to make it to the endgame. So here he is. At 44th is Russell from Big Brother 11. He is someone who could be a solid player or even a good player, but he got in his own way. Russell was actually very observant about the cast, as he saw through Lydia's strategy, knew that Brayden was a problem, knew that Jeff was not loyal, and that Ronnie was also untrustworthy. He encouraged Jesse to send home Brayden first, and their alliance started dominating the pre-jury phase, which he helped due to winning a few competitions. At the same time, his personality rubbed people the wrong way, especially his paranoia and volatility, which made his alliance distrust him a lot, to the point where they chose Ronnie over him, and Chima, his own ally, actively working to send him home. Russell would have been the first juror if it wasn't for the coup d'etat to save him, so I did dog him for that. And while he made that relationship with Jeff beforehand, he was at the bottom of the other side, and was sent home by Jeff, who did not trust him. I think if Russell toned down the paranoia and the fighting, he would be a much better player, as he can be strategic and can win competitions, but gets in his own way and makes it very easy for people to mistrust him. At 43rd is Janelle from Big Brother 6, Big Brother 7, and Big Brother 14. For someone who made it to third place twice, Janelle should be a lot higher and should be in a completely different tier altogether, but when you look at her 2 games, it is middling at best. Janelle's issues came from not having a good social game in both seasons, as the other house guests saw her as extremely snobbish and uptight, where it alienated her from a lot of the house guests, and the same thing happened in Big Brother 7 as well, though there are pre-game alliances and elements that came into place. She was able to eventually find an alliance, but it caused her to only want to work in the sides dynamic, which shows that she's very unadaptable, but she was able to do well in that dynamic. The difference in Big Brother 6 is that she didn't rely on competitions to make it that far, or to make it far, where she absolutely needed to win competitions for sure in order to make it far in Big Brother 7, or else she would have been an early boot. Janelle also played emotionally throughout the 2 seasons, and whatever strategic potential she had was thwarted due to it, where it was just due to personal revenge in Big Brother 6, and she was being manipulated by, well, in Big Brother 7. Despite that, she did perform well on 2 seasons, and very well could have won one of them, but the skill set is lacking, despite her placement on those seasons. I will say that Janelle did improve as a player regarding giving up the notion that competitions were the only things that mattered. You need to kiss butts to the people in power at times, and you do need to float at times. Unfortunately for her, the improvements she made in the game and strategy did not matter, since her reputation preceded her and the house were full of non-fans, so her reputation could also be twisted as well. And the biggest issue for Janelle in Big Brother has always been social, and that element unfortunately did not improve. Overall, she's still a mediocre player in my eyes. At 42nd is Sharon from Big Brother 9. People talking about Sharon being this underrated, robbed, great player, and I never really saw. And that was only reiterated once I completed rewatching the season. It was unfortunate that she was booted because of her ex's actions, but she was lucky to have come back in the first place, when many people don't get that opportunity. Sharon's entire strategy in the season was to lay low and to let the chaos happen around her, which is an effective strategy, and clearly worked for her. Sharon did have some good reads at times, but there are other times where she kind of just let Josh make the moves for them when she should have been more active, and she was more than willing to take the bullet for him many times throughout the season. After she and her alliance blew it, Sharon was nominated as a pawn for a majority of the season, but she had a good social game while coming off as unthreatening, while letting her chaotic allies self-sabotage themselves. I think Sharon just needs to be more active, choose better allies, and not just play from self-defense, and I would feel better about her as a player, but I do see her making it pretty far on most seasons. At 41st is Michelle from Big Brother 10. I think the thing with Michelle is that she really wanted to be a part of the Covenant Alliance deep down, hence her getting along with them at first, but got mad when they rejected her in the 3rd week, and kind of let that derail her game, and caused her to be a bit tunnel-visioned. She was always seen as the strongest female competitor from the very beginning, as she chose to align with Jessie, Memphis, and Angie, but people were rubbed the wrong way by them, and she did not handle the loss in power well at all. Michelle was able to win HOH and boots Libra, the one person who was targeting her out of the cast, and while she kind of laid under the radar afterwards, Michelle was also being a compulsive liar and consistently siding with the wrong people on the wrong things, so it caused her to be backstabbed by Dan. Michelle was good in competitions and was all over the place socially, as a lot of people liked her, though some got annoyed with her volatility and violence by the end, and I do think she was decent strategically. If she played less personally and didn't let herself get so tunnel visioned, I will put her in a higher tier, and I think she would do well or this well on most seasons. At 40th is Chima from Big Brother 11. She was an interesting person to look at, especially since she's the only person that has been expelled, but lasted a long enough time for us to analyze and have a good feeling on her scale as a player. Chima's social game almost caused her to be booted first, since the other side did not like her at all, but she luckily had her alliance that was loyal to her. One thing I will say is that she managed to put herself in a powerful position in the Jesse alliance, as she was equally his number 2 with Natalie. Her connections with Kevin and to a lesser extent Lydia was what gave them the numbers, and she had a lot of say in that alliance. Things took a downturn when the Russell fight happened, where she let Michelle trick her, and there was sexual tension gone wrong, where she was too tunnel vision on getting Russell out of the house, and when that plan was thwarted by the coup, she could not overcome it. I think her social game is all over the place. Her strategy is okay, and she did win a comp. She has some skills, but I can't say she is good or bad. At 39th is Evil Dick from Big Brother 8 and Big Brother 13. Of course, we all know about Evil Dick getting help from America's player, because America wanted to keep the Donatos safe, and that was also helped by the edit that they got on the show. Evil Dick was doing well socially for the first few weeks of the season, and found himself in a majority alliance very quickly, which he rode for a while, but things went downhill once he made the move to boot Nick, which he said he regretted, and targeted Eric way too soon, especially when he and Danielle were at the bottom of their alliance. In general, the move failed and backfired, causing him to be at the bottom of the house, and while he won the veto, he used it to save his daughter, and would have been voted out without America's player. Strategy was Dick's strong suit, as he was able to get things done and saw through the motivations of the other house guests, but his attacks on people were not strategy like how the show tried to paint it out to be, and he could win a decent amount of competitions. With Big Brother 13, he was instrumental in setting up the Veterans Alliance and adding in some of the newbies, but his removal caused us to not see how he would do, so he is here. At 38th is Jeff from Big Brother 11 and Big Brother 13. I remember mentioning in my Big Brother 13 tier ranking video that I wasn't sure if his improvement as a player was mainly due to him actively improving his skills and his errors, or the format of the season, and I definitely think it's the latter now that I've had some time to think about it. Jeff sided with the minority alliance in the beginning of Big Brother 11, and he was immune in some of those weeks because the athletes won a power, so they couldn't go after him even if they wanted to. Luckily for him, the other side started importing on themselves, and he was able to make amends with Russell. And of course, he was given the coup d'etat, which was able to dismantle the structure of the house and make it into his favor. But as we will see on both seasons, Jeff does not handle being in power well and doesn't make the best choices. He makes a promise to someone, wins the veto on his HOH, backstabs someone that he shouldn't have because it makes him the biggest target in the house, and then he's booted right after his HOH reign ended. On Big Brother 13, he was able to be in a power position due to the Veteran Alliance and making connections with the likes of newbies that are Shelly and Adam, and went on his way to make sure the house liked him, and to not build a target on himself and Jordan, compared to Brendan and Rachel. Despite the change in position in his 2 seasons, he played very similarly, and I feel like he's an upper mediocre tier. The final person in this tier at 37th is Judd from Big Brother 15. While I didn't think he was a great player before rewatching the season, I was expecting him to be a better player than he ended up being. Judd apparently had an alliance with McCreta and Andy, in addition to being on good terms with people on that side of the house, whereas even the people on the other side of the house liked him as well. It seemed like his social game could have carried him very far, but that didn't end up happening. He won HOH when I don't think he should have, though he apparently created some lie that booted Caitlyn out of the house, and people started coming up with these speculations about him, and his social game started falling off. He was blindsided at the double eviction, and then came back to the game, which I docked him for, only to be at the bottom of another alliance willfully. It seems like when he has to strategize, he tends to struggle and doesn't have the best discernment. He won a few competitions in the season, and while I rarely see him going early, I don't know if he has the willpower or the skill to be a better player. The first person in this tier at 36th is Jesse from Big Brother 10 and Big Brother 11. He played a bad game in Big Brother 10, as he got into an argument on the first night and then needed to win the veto in order to save himself, but he found himself in a good position by the end of the week with that 8 alliance. He then won the HOH the next week, and while he remained loyal, people did not like the attitude of himself and his alliance. the other three people in Angie, Michelle, and Memphis, which caused him to be on the block for his final 2 weeks. And while it seemed like he was going to get himself out of that bad spot, he picked a fight with 2 of the pivotal votes that sent him home. In the next season, there's a lot of improvements, and he did realize that he needed to come down and be more of a uniting force, and also telling his allies to come down, since it brought a lot more unnecessary attention on them. Jesse was actually able to have an alliance that won competitions this time, and he was one of the main strategic forces of the group, with sending Brayden and Casey home, trying to keep his alliance together and seeing a few steps ahead. When you look at his 2 seasons, there was always social potential there, since people had meltdowns on both times he was evicted, and he was taken out by a twist that wasn't earned in BB11, when he would have made it further. At the same time, a part of me does wonder if he had this power and influence because he was the sole vet in that season. He can win competitions, grew strategically and socially, and was able to gain respect in the second season, so I think he's a bit above mediocre if I combine his 2 seasons overall. At 35th is Matt from Big Brother 9. I am really shocked that he is here, but I do think that he has the elements of a solid player. Of course, his gameplay started out very sloppy because a pair of his allies revealed that they had a partner in the house, and his other pair of allies decided to nominate them, and he and Natalie made the poor choice with the veto that week, and not saving his allies. In addition to that, he and Natalie were very close to going home in the second week. After that, he was actually in a very good position, and was in the middle of the house, and then the backdoor plan of him failed, though it had very little to do with anything he did. What would become Team Christ started to form, and when he was nominated, he was actually able to get more votes than he was supposed to, making it a tie vote, and his entire alliance wanted him to stay. So I don't think he's a bad campaigner. I didn't feel like he's mediocre because he was actually pretty good socially throughout the season and had the concept of game on a strategic level while not really being bad at competitions. The issue is, he's just too messy of a player, but I have a feeling that he would do better on a lot of other seasons, and he was also screwed by the returning player twist and how it was specifically set up, where they only knew that one of the options was the recently evicted house guest in James, where he would have made it further without that happening or literally anyone else returning to the game. At 34th is Sheila from Big Brother 9. She's another one that I was shocked that ended up being here, especially with how rough her journey was in the beginning. Sheila's behavior almost caused herself and Adam to be booted in the power couple phase, and they were always alternate targets in the first few weeks. Her only real ally was Alicine, who was a huge liability, and she even backed up off her. Things turned around for Sheila when she saw how the James, Chelsea, Sharon, and Joshua side of the house viewed her and the others, especially in the conversation she had with Chelsea, so she stopped Ryan from backdooring Matt and encouraged what would become Team Christ to form. It completely changed the game, and while there were emotional means behind it, Sheila was the only one who made a move so big. She and Adam got closer as allies, and she became an integral member of the alliance, but started to get outplayed at the end. I do think her social game improved as the season went on, and she definitely is one of the better strategic players of the season, which says a lot, but she wasn't good in competitions and it's just a bit too messy. From what she showed, she is a bit better than mediocre, which is why she's on the lower end of the solid tier. At 33rd is Danielle from Big Brother 8 and Big Brother 13. I didn't know where Danielle would end up when I started ranking her and how I would feel about her. Danielle was able to get into a majority alliance earlier on in the season, and the house did feel bad for her, but there was a shift in how they viewed her, and I think it was due to her relationship with Nick while having a boyfriend. Right after he was booted, she tried to target someone in her own alliance and did it in the most sloppy way matter, and it failed because she didn't even have the numbers to do so, and some alleged diary room interference to get the others to keep him over Kale. Allegedly. It was good that she made up with Jen, but she threw that away as soon as she could, and she would have been the first juror if her father hadn't saved her with the veto. And she was the one that would have been backdoored if the producers allowed Eric to use the veto in the final 7. I like that Danielle was always willing to make moves, wanted to make moves, and was very self-interested, but she needed to be saved a few times, was heavily reliant on her competition wins, and her social game left a lot to be desired. In a lot of ways, Danielle played the same and differently in her second season, BB13. I do think she improved her social game, as she got close with many of the newbies in the season, and even the vets, especially Rachel and Brendan initially, before she turned on them, and she got closer to Shelley and Porsche as the season went on. Danielle was in a great position within the house, and could have cruised on it, but blew it up by making a move too early regarding turning on the veterans and needed a comp run of herself and Kalia for the next few HOHs. And as soon as they lost, she went home. She has a lot of the ingredients: good at comps, understands strategy, and can be social, but it's all so messy and it never comes together very well, hence her being low on this tier. At 32nd is Amber from Big Brother 8. One of the reasons why people don't know much about or talk about her game is because she was given a very comedic edit, where we were laughing at her emotions and antics in the house based on what production showed. People forget to mention or realize that she had a great social game in the beginning, where everyone recognized that she was a better player than Carol and was in multiple alliances, but they kept her because they liked her so much more. She was a part of the Late Night Jamboree Alliance that was running the game and was in the swing position during the Kale and Eric vote, but she remained loyal to her alliance, and she wasn't even a target after that, or the immediate target after that by the Donatos and the other side. Of course, Amber ended up going home after she was blindsided in the Dustin vote and could not readjust to the new dynamics of the house, but her last 4 weeks of the house only played out the way they did because of America's Player, which screwed her more than once, since Dustin wouldn't have gone home and the veto would have been used on her if Eric had any agency. At the same time, people did get annoyed with her, and she had the martyr, good people mentality, which isn't good, but I think she's a solid player who would perform well enough on most seasons. At 31st is Dustin from Big Brother 8. A lot of the points I made about Amber applies to him as well, pertaining America's Players completely screwing up his game, and he wouldn't have went home had Eric had actual agency. Despite Joe airing out his personal laundry on the first night, he was able to recover quickly and find himself in the Late Night Jamboree Alliance, which controlled the first half of the season. Many of the house guests went to him for advice, and he was powerful in his alliance, but things started to change when he won HOH, as he got a huge case of HOH-itis, which caused people to trust him less by the end of it, but it wasn't why he ended up going home. He was the one that caused Amber to stay in check about not booting Eric and the diary room, allegedly, since he's still a number, and he made a dumb move of nominating himself for eviction. He was competent at strategy, though he has a huge issue with overconfidence and comes off as untrustworthy, but I think he does well on most seasons and got screwed over due to Twist, so it bumped him a bit. At 30th is Raken from Big Brother 12. He came in with a set strategy from the beginning, with laying low for a majority of the season, letting the poor players take one another out, killing the drama, being a peacemaker, and building relationships. Unlike many other people, Reagan was able to execute his strategy down pat, and in a way, I think it worked out too well. While he made relationships with a lot of people, a majority of them were with the women, who were booted relatively early in the season. And then there's Matt and Brittany, who are all prioritizing other people over him. But because he was so blinded by Brenshaw, and he didn't have any close relationships with most of the brigade members, he was boxed in a corner by the time his season was ending, and while he figured out the alliance, he didn't have much to do. I do think that he understands strategy, and is better at competitions than people remember. He has a lot of work to do for me to consider him a good or even a great player, but he is a solid player. At 29th is Libra from Big Brother 10. She is also another one who has a lot of the good qualities, but is just a messy player overall. Libra was able to bond with April, Keisha, and Ollie, and was arguably the biggest figure and reason that caused the flip in Brian's game to go upside down, while being a part of the loose 8-person alliance. The thing is, everyone saw what Libra was doing, and the social game was not very good, though I think a lot of this was misogynoir, since people who acted the same way as her on the same season didn't get the same amount of flack. There was the weak push to boot her in week 2 by Steven, and a huge push to boot her in week 3 by the same people who did not want her booted in week 2 and had the power to do so. And when the other side eventually won HOH, she was finally sent home. At the same time, Libra had a lot of power and influence over the moves that were made in the pre-jury, so she is good on a strategic point of view, and by the end of her journey, she was able to make amends with April and Ollie to the point where they did want to keep her. And she was also close to winning many competitions in this season, so I don't think she's bad in that element. She seemed aware of her mistakes, so I can see her improving on them and being a better player if she was on another season or another situation. At 28th is April from Big Brother 10. I think that April is a similar player to Libra, where her social game is not the best, but she is very strategic in the moves that she made and how she essentially controlled the first half of the season. She was in an alliance of 8, but was closely working with Libra, Keisha, and her showmate Ali, but the issue is, they are all so self-interested, or the three women at least, and it's very easily to engage into conflict with each of them, so they consistently blew up at one another. They made the first move against the other side of the 8, which was also aided by Keisha, and then April winning HOH. Her game unraveled because she could not manage Keisha and Libra while transparently making her own relationships with Jesse and Michelle that left them hanging. Once the dynamics shifted, April was not able to adapt and was the first one from the other side to be taken out. It is impressive that April was seen as her own player outside of Ollie and had her own agency, but her social game needed a bit of work, and she did win an HOH. But I don't know how reliant she is pertaining winning competitions. Overall, I think she showed that she gets the elements of the game and made some moves, but she's a bit too messy for me to put her any higher. At 27th is Ian from Big Brother 14. He had a lot of chances and things outside of his control that helped him get as far as he did. Boogie needed to save him with the immunity, where he was going to be on the block otherwise in the first week, and could have easily been voted out in the first week. And then there's the double veto, which he ended up finding in that box, and it was one of the reasons why he was not sent home in 8th place. Ian was an outsider during the first few weeks of the season, since he was not Boogie's closest player, and he was not a part of the Quack Pack yet, or in that grouping, but he did have a relationship with Brittany that brought him into the alliance, and Mike gave him enough information where he was able to get Boogie and Frank targeted, which I don't think was the best move for him, especially at that time. From the final 8 and 7 onwards, he had to win himself into safety, and he didn't even realize that he was being targeted, where he also made it through the final 4 and was shocked where he stayed over Shane, which was the only time in the Dre phase where he wasn't immune. While Ian is good at competitions, and he did improve exponentially socially in the season, he was out of his depth strategically and was not aware of the house dynamics as much as he thought. So here he is, since he does have some good qualities to him. At 26th is Danielle from Big Brother 14. It's really shocking that she ended up being this high, since I don't think very highly of her as a player. But the thing is that she didn't do a whole lot wrong in the season. Her teammates were booted quickly, and she had to lay low when she was nominated, and started forming some important relationships. After the first few weeks, she and Dan aligned with Brittany and Shane, which was the start of a power alliance that would end up dominating the season. She was the only woman in the season who could win competitions, essentially, and kept up with the guys in that element, so I give her props on that. At the same time, she did make dumb and personal decisions when she won power, like sending Janelle home because she thought Janelle wanted Shane, despite being married, and Danielle wanting to be the quote-unquote main girl, and then there was her choke of using the veto on Dan at the final 4, causing his showmance to go home, which is not what she wanted. People got annoyed with her as the season went on, but she did have a decent amount of win equity. I am confused about her because I don't know how much of it was her own skills or just Dan aiding her, but the game she played was solid all around. At 25th is McCrae from Big Brother 15. He definitely benefited from being a superfan and knew most of the meta elements of the show and the game. McCrae ended up winning the first HOH and used it as well as he could as he got into an alliance, built relationships with other people, and nominated people who had no ties. McCrae bailed on his alliance to get into the majority when things were not working, and worked closely with Amanda and Andy for a majority of the season, and things were going well, until Andy flipped on himself and his alliance, himself being McCrae, so McCrae is at the bottom of the season for the rest of his time there, where he had to win out. McCrae knew when to lay low, and it worked well for him, but there's a point where you need to get out of that and to stop focusing on, quote-unquote, the house, especially at the endgame. A lot of the house guests saw him as an extension of Amanda, and he mainly had shallow relationships with most of the other house guests, and his win equity wasn't as large because of this. I think if he wasn't so passive, he would be a better player, since he's solid strategically and is shockingly good at competitions, where he did well even in a lot of the ones that he didn't end up winning. At 24th is Natalie from Big Brother 11. She is someone who went through a journey throughout the season. Natalie was in the majority alliance for the first half of the season, and it was her relationship with Chima that gave them the numbers that was needed to win the house. She was always giving her opinions on what moves needed to be made for the alliance, and was very high up in that structure of the house. So when things changed, Natalie's world crumbled. Her two closest allies were out in a bit over a 24-hour time span. She was consistently being nominated, and while she was aligned with Lydia and Kevin, she was not close to them and had to learn how to work with them. She and Kevin had to come from the bottom and really worked to get Jeff and Jordan to trust them, where they backstabbed Jeff and Jordan the next week and they started regaining power. At the same time, Natalie started showing how selfish she was, which turned off people in and out of the house, where she lost Jesse's vote and Kevin was going to cut her at the final three. Socially, Natalie just rubbed people the wrong way, and she didn't have high jury equity, while also just having too much ego. But we saw her play from the top and bottom well, which is very rare for a Big Brother player to do, so I think she does well on most seasons. At 23rd is Kalia from Big Brother 13. Out of most of the newbies, Kalia wanted to lay low and be an observer, so she would be able to make big moves later on in the game, and I think she did that for the most part. Kalia was one of the 2 votes who sided with the veterans against Keith during the first vote, as he essentially destroyed their relationship before it happened, so she was in the middle. Things went awry for her due to Danielle, and Kalia was thrown right in the middle of it. She and Danielle needed to win the next 3 HOHs for them to be safe, and to be able to gain some additional allies like Porsche, and of course I have to address how Kalia completely let the twist screw up her mind pertaining to her HOH, where she sent out a non-threat in Lawan home and kept all of her enemies in the house. She also almost went home during the Danielle boot, but she won HOH and made the biggest move in the season by booting Jeff, and having Shelly and Porsche on their side. Things were looking up for her, but the newest twist came back. So the newbie revolution never took off, and she was booted soon afterwards. I think Kalia has the gist for strategy when she isn't getting paranoid and emotional, but her social game is a bit all over the place, though some of it was due to the misogynoir, in my opinion, and she's good at competitions, as she won 2 HOHs and did well in all of the endurance competitions, even though she didn't win. She would do better on a cast that's more diverse, but she held her own on a season that was heavily stacked against her. At 22nd is Kevin from Big Brother 11. He is someone whose game I ended up lowering on after the rewatch. It seemed like he was only really close to Shima and Lydia, and while the alliance with the former brought him into the Jesse side of the house, he was at the bottom of that alliance, and it seemed like Lydia had the better relationships with the other side of the house. Before that obviously went kaput. He did work on his relationships and intentionally laid under the radar, and didn't end up using the veto on Lydia on Chima's HOH, as she was safe, but sometimes it's best to just use the veto on your ally. The reason why I ended up lowering on Kevin is that I didn't realize how lucky he was with the coup d'etat, since it was able to better his position in a way that the dynamics was not leading up to otherwise, as he was able to vote out Jesse, and it's a good move, or it's good that he realized that he needed to take that shot at that time. He was on the chopping block sooner than later, and the twist changed that. He was able to work closely with Natalie in the second half of the season due to that, and they were able to kind of play Jeff. At the same time, I questioned his choice in wanting to take Jordan to the end over Natalie, and it showed that the awareness isn't completely there. I think Kevin gets the strategy, social, and competitiveness, since he did do well in a lot of the competitions before he actually started winning them, but I think he had a blind spot against certain archetypes, and had some slightly off reads at several times in the season, while getting lucky with the coup. At 21st is Natalie from Big Brother 9. I think she's someone who's very underrated as a player, but I get why she is, since Natalie is extremely sloppy. She aligned with Alex, Amanda, Parker, Jen, and was obviously partners with Matt, and they had power in the first week, but they completely blew it, causing Parker and Jen to go home by not using the veto, and she was very close to going home in the second week. It did seem like she was trying to play all sides in the beginning, which wasn't the most successful, but she was the only one willing to do this, and actively trying to build relationships with everyone, which I do think it worked, as I think her doing this is why the other side approached her with the Matt backdoor side plan on Ryan's HOH, and she sold them out, which was a good move on her end, and started the downfall of the other side. Of course, she got played with James's HOH about back being protected when they made that deal, but she was the leader of Team Christ and led them in essentially all their decisions, where she got Adam to target the showmans and was the really strategic one in the alliance, while also winning the HOH in the final 7. She did start playing both sides again in the final 6, which is good, but she was just too sloppy with how she did it, so the entire house turned against her, since they also realized how much of a threat she was. I think Natalie is solid strategically and good in competitions, but she was messy socially, and I think that was her biggest flaw, but I think she would shock people if she came back. At 20th is Helen from Big Brother 15. Before rewatching the season, I didn't know where Helen would end up, as a lot of people mentioned how overrated she was, and I don't know if I agree or disagree with that. Helen did have a good social game, especially in the beginning of the season, where most of the house did like her, and she was one of the main people that worked to flip the house against Nick and the moving company. And did this while she was nominated, and was never in danger of going home that week. She won HOH afterwards and took out Jeremy, which is a solid move for her, and then aligned with Andy and Miranda, while also being heavily aligned with Alyssa. The issue with her is that she cut off her social legs, where she desperately needed people like Howard, Jesse, and Candice to be able to boot her big threats, and so she could regain agency and put herself in the best position. She kept on saying it's too soon, and her game also got exposed during the Jesse boot week, and right when she wanted to make a move against Miranda and started mistrusting Andy was when she went home. I think Helen is good socially, though she could have been a bit better, and I think she was solid strategically, but if she wasn't so passive and a bit more aggressive, and knowing when to take shots, I think she would be a much better player. I don't think she's good at competitions, despite her winning in HOH, since she wasn't really close to winning any of the other competitions from what I remember. At 19th is Porsche from Big Brother 13. I really don't know how I feel about putting her this high, but a lot of people in this tier have a lot of good qualities, but it's just very messy, so I guess Porsche kinda does belong here. She was in danger the first week and was very close to going home, but her idea of herself and Keith getting closer to the veterans was a good idea, and it's that support of the veterans that caused her to stay, though I'm sure Kalia and Shelley voted for her to stay due to nothing of Porsche's own doing, but mainly Keith self-sabotaging himself. She was out of the loop for the first half of the season and was almost sent home during Kalia's first HOH, since that is what Shelley was pitching. I do give her credit for pivoting from Rachel and onto Kalia and Danielle when they were winning power, and when Rachel was becoming a liability. But she needed to pivot to build more relationships with people throughout the season, since there were a lot of people that mentioned that she didn't have a relationship with them, and Jordev were the biggest voices of this. Things were going up for her once Kalia booted Jeff, and she won HOH to target Rachel, though I think she should have targeted Jordan during that round. But she did end up making up with Rachel, which was good, and only lost to a vote with Rachel in the final two. People tend to forget that Porsche placed second in most of the competitions she competed in, and she wasn't even allowed to compete for a few weeks, and then she started winning them at around the end. At the same time, I do think she's not the most consistent strategically or socially, but she showed more flexibility than a lot of people realized, and a lot of house guests can execute themselves, or they're not able to do so, so I give her props for that. At 18th is Michelle from Big Brother 11. She's a funny one, since Michelle was kind of a loner for most of the game, but she did have loose connections to the Jeff and Jordan side of the house, though they never trusted her too much when they should have. But it is somewhat her fault as to why they didn't trust her. Michelle flipped on her own team to boot Chima, but she was able to repair that relationship, and the Jesse side started working with her, so she was kind of in the middle of repairing things and was in the middle of the house, though she was the backup target in the third week and was apparently going to be the target in the sixth week had the coup not happened. But it was Lydia saying that, so who knows how much validity that had. Michelle was also able to be a major cause for Russell and Chima turning against one another, and that really dismantled the Jesse side of the house, where her HOH also sent Chima home, but not in normal means. She was able to make amends with Russell and work with him throughout the middle weeks of the season, though it caused her own allies in Jeff and Jordan to mistrust her, and then she had to win out from that point onwards, which she could not do. I think Michelle is pretty sharp and astute strategically, and was good competitively, but the social game needed some serious work, since there were people who actively hated her, like Natalie, Kevin, and even Lydia, but she was actually a jury threat, so it showed that she had some equity when it was all coming to a close. At 17th is Jamaica from Big Brother 8. I think it is very easy for people to forget about the game she played in the season, especially because of the edit she got, mainly focusing on her religion, but if you look deeply enough, her game is clear. It's clear to me that Jamaica wanted to play a loyal and honest game, which did work out for her. She was in a good position within the Late Night Jamboree Alliance as they ran the first half of the season, where she did contribute a lot to the strategy of the Alliance and had some of the best reads in that Alliance. But you saw some of the flaws to her game even early on, where she was essentially pressured by Jen to play in the veto for her because she picked her ball, though the Alliance already planned to backdoor Nick, so I guess it was fine. And then she gave up her ability to play in the next 5 HOHs when she was never in actual danger anyways, so she didn't even need to win that veto. This was partially why she was taken to the Final Four, but she also had several twists that screwed up her game, where Dustin was blindsided due to it, putting herself and Amber at the bottom, and then Danielle was not allowed to be backdoored because the producers didn't want Eric to use the veto, where Amber would have stayed otherwise, and it would have put Jessica and Eric in a better position with herself, meaning that Jamaica was in a better position. And even despite that, she was arguably the biggest story threat out of the endgamers, and especially out of the people in the Final Four. So she was very good socially and solid strategically, but could not win competitions, was not self-interested, and a bit too naive and trusting at times. Too trusting, I mean. At 16th is Amanda from Big Brother 15. For someone who was not a fan of the show before starting Big Brother 15, Amanda was very impressive. She was essentially the one coaching Superfan McRae on how to run his HOH and gave him a lot of good advice. I also think Amanda was the main one who decided to weaponize the MVP twist via Alyssa to control the third nominee, and was the catalyst for why the moving company dismantled very early on. She was able to let her influence take over and run through the house very quickly, and had a hand in most of the evictions that took place in the season. The issue for her is that people saw how much power she had, and whenever people wanted to take a shot at that side, she was going to be that shot. People were charmed by Amanda at first, but she cannot hold back her personality, and a tyrannical side of her peeped out more and more whenever things didn't go her way. So people got more annoyed with her as the season went on, and she cannot handle it when things didn't go her way. Amanda was also poor in competitions, though she did get better at them by the tail end of her journey, stopping her only backdoor. When she is focusing on strategy, she is great. She always stayed a few steps ahead and was almost able to save herself from being evicted. I think Amanda has a lot of good traits for the game, but her anger, emotions, and control issues are huge flaws that I don't know if she could overcome, even if she was on another season or situation. At 15th is Spencer from Big Brother 15. It's weird that he is this high, especially when you look at the trajectory of his journey in the season. He was in the moving company, and while he was well situated in the alliance, the issue with him is that his alliance was not a strong alliance. Props to Spencer for knowing that his alliance was going down, so he flipped from them and then came clean about the alliance when it was officially over immediately to the other house guests. While he did try to make a power move to target Amanda at around the middle point of the season, he was out of the power for a majority of the season afterwards, and was nominated as a pawn for a lot of those weeks in the season, but I think he played fine from the block. He built some good relationships with people, and is relatively palatable enough for the house, which is why he stayed around. I do think that he was in a good position within the Exterminators when it was formed, as he and Andy essentially controlled the alliance. He did win some competitions, so while I don't think he's necessarily good at them overall, he is mediocre in that element, and I do think he has a pretty good strategic mind while having a solid enough social game. I feel like he does well on a lot of seasons, and I think he thrives if he's in a more solid structure, but he played well for being outside of the structure and at the bottom from the very early on in the season to the end. And he was outside of the power structure, outside of the very beginning and the very end of the season. At 14th is Shane from Big Brother 14. He is someone who seemingly has all the pieces together, or should have all the pieces together. He is great in competitions, but isn't really that reliant on them, and is a really social player, which would be a combination that causes him to do well on pretty much any season. I do have to mention that he would have went home in week 2 and was a target entering week 3, but he won the veto and the following HOH. But he was in that poor position because Willie was expelled and someone else had to go home. After a rough beginning, he and Brittany aligned with Danielle and Dan, where they essentially dominated the entire season. Shane was talked into targeting Frank by his alliance, but his HOH was essentially nulled, and then HOH again to split up Boogie and Frank. After all of that, he mainly just stuck with his alliance, so he somewhat made a deal with Joe. My main issue with Shane is that he was always talked into making a move by his alliance instead of going what he wants and building agency for himself, and it was a consistent issue with him throughout the season, as Brittany almost always told him what to do. And then when Danielle asked him if he would be fine going on the block during the Final Four and to veto Dan for no reason, he agreed to it, and then he was shocked that he was booted. Shane needs to be more sharp and firm in his agency and strategy, and I think he could be a top-tier player, but it's too huge of a weakness for me to ignore, so he's on the upper end of the solid tier. And the final person in this tier at 13th is Adam from Big Brother 9. A lot of people discredit his win and gameplay due to what he spent the prize money on, and I don't think that's really fair because we're talking about the game. Adam was definitely sloppy in the beginning, since his turbulence with Sheila almost caused them to go home due to the power player twist, and a lot of the arguing tended to make Sheila look worse in the eyes of the house, and he kinda came off looking better. Adam kinda just relied on relaxing, not pissing anyone off, and working on building relationships for the first half of the season, which did end up working for him. He was brought into the Team Christ Alliance, and they dominated the rest of the season, where he was at the top of the food chain, and he was able to play Natalie and Ryan, the two other players who were higher on the totem pole, making sure that he was the best positioned person in the house and the alliance. Adam is good at competitions and is good socially, but he got messy strategically at times, especially with his second HOH. A part of me wonders if he would perform similarly if he was on another cast that isn't as wild as Big Brother 9, and if his personality would annoy the hell out of other people, hence him being here. The first person in this tier at 12th is Matt from Big Brother 12. What is interesting about Matt is that I feel like he has all the skills to be a potentially great player. Socially, he was very good in the house, as he had some of the most connections out of anyone in the house, which was one of the reasons why his alliance turned on him. He had a grasp for strategy and can win competitions. Despite being very skilled, it never really came together in the way that you would think it would. Matt was the anchor of the brigade and was the leader of the alliance, while also being the one who won them the competitions in the first few weeks, as he won in week 3 and week 5. At the same time, he had the tendency to overplay, like suggesting to be nominated in the second week, and then telling everyone that he was shocked when all that was just very unnecessary, and then wanting to target Kathy. When he had the chance to put himself in the best spot possible, and when he was told he was going home, he used the diamond power of veto on himself to boot Kathy, and continued throwing loyal allies under the bus, like Reagan. Also, lying about his wife having a disease, which is very unnecessary. While I do think he would do well on any season, due to some of the first things I've stated, he's just too sloppy for me, hence him being at around the bottom of this tier. At 11th is Keisha from Big Brother 10. I was not expecting her to be this high when I made the list, and I honestly didn't even know if she would get into the solid tier, much less the good tier. She was able to align herself with April and Libra in the beginning and was a part of the 8 alliance, which lasted about 2 weeks. It did seem like she had better relationships with people who were not in the majority alliance, like Steve, and even someone like Angie approached her to work with the other side, so I think she was doing fine socially, which is something that April nor Libra had. Keisha won HOH and decided to flip the house by ending the 8 and getting Jerry and Rennie on her side, but I don't know how strategic and intentional the choice was. We saw her flip the house once again with keeping Memphis over Jesse, and Libra ended up getting all the blame. I do think she starts faltering off in the second half of the season as she became more passive and complacent, and while she had good reads and instinct, like her knowing that she was going home without anyone saying anything, she cannot overcome the duo of Dan and Memphis, even ignoring Rennie's warnings. She is good at competitions, her instincts are sharp and helps with strategy, and she has a pretty good social game, while learning the game as she went on. At the same time, I do think she is way too emotional at times and confrontational. Based on this season, I think she would be a sharp player who can do damage, know when to make the right moves, and really become better. At 10th is Brittany from Big Brother 12 and Big Brother 14. Clearly, I thought Brittany had a mediocre run during her first season, since she mainly played personally by obsessing over Branchall and getting lost for the forest in the trees as the season went on, despite getting warnings from people like Kristen and Reagan about the bigger picture. She was great in competitions during her first seasons, as she won an HOH and quite a few vetoes while performing well in other competitions, and she had a great skill of self-preservation, where she kissed butt and put down her pride when she needed to, and always making sure that she is safe. So I think her flaw in this season was that while she was great in the short term, she wasn't great in long-term planning. She was able to blend in with the house socially, where she had bonds with a lot of people in the house, and drifted over to Lane and Reagan after Monet was booted early, so she's adaptable in a social setting, and even Brenchel tried befriending her several times, even when it was clear that she wasn't on their side. There were definitely some improvements on Big Brother 14, as she really put her social skills to work and was able to use them to put her in a powerful position and alliance with Shane, Danielle, and Dan throughout the season. I have to mention that she was in a poor position at first due to not being a good coach, but it was her relationship with Ian that caused him to give them a lot of information, especially about Frank and Buggy, and she essentially told Shane what moves he needed to make whenever he was in power. But in both seasons, she ended up being betrayed and had blinders for certain people that caused her to be booted through an unforeseen move, and a bunch of unforeseen circumstances is what caused her to be booted in Big Brother 14. I think Brittany would be a better player if she cut down on the unnecessary cattiness as well. At 9th is Memphis from Big Brother 10. He is a very interesting one, since I think he has a lot of the skills to do well in Big Brother in general. He is strategic and approaches the game like a business trip/business opportunity, and he made it known to people, which also put a target on his back at first. He was always looking out for himself and making the optimal moves that he needed to make, which is a good thing. Memphis was close to Jesse from the beginning, and the Brian move saved him from potentially going first, but he managed to get himself in the 8th alliance. He, Jesse, Michelle, and Angie found themselves at the bottom quickly, but he actually built some relationships with people like Dan and Keisha, which is why he was able to stay over Jesse, as Dan would have saved him even without America's player. After this, Memphis started winning competitions, making deals with people like Jerry so he can take himself and Dan to the end, and the Renegades dominated the second half of the season. The main issue with Memphis is that he came off as too impersonal to the other house guests, and he took Dan to the end, where he came off like Dan's sidekick, so he was the first person to lose a jury vote unanimously. He can make bonds with people, though he's just very selective about it, and we know that he can strategize and compete, but he just doesn't have what it takes to be in the upper tier. At 8 is Enzo from Big Brother 12. From what we saw in the season, Enzo is definitely a good player who is aware of his strengths and weaknesses, though coming to the realization of the latter was somewhat humiliating for the most part. Enzo knew that he needed to get into an alliance and was the main person who helped form the brigade, but he was the only person that didn't really contribute to the parachute atmosphere of the alliance, as he didn't have a side piece, quote unquote. I think this was one of the reasons why he was so focused on the alliance, since while he had good social relationships with everyone in the house, and they weren't targeting him, you can tell that he got jealous of his allies at times because he didn't have those game relationships with people not in the alliance. At around the midpoint of the season, he and Hayden kind of became partners, as they recruited Brendan on their side after Rachel left, and the two decided to turn on Matt, which benefited the both of them. While he made all the moves to get to the end, he did not end up setting himself up to be in the best position to win, and also was not a good competitor. I don't ever see him going early on a season, but I don't know if he has the instincts that would cause him to pull a win, as he overestimated his control and ability in the season. At 7th is Jessica from Big Brother 8. She was a huge surprise for me when I started rewatching the season. While I always thought she was a solid player, she was better than I remembered by the time I finished watching the season. We saw her not care at all to work with Carol, and her enemy ended up going home immediately, but we didn't see much of her on the edit for the next few weeks. Jessica was a part of the Late Night Jamboree Alliance, and they were running the season, but she didn't have bad relationships with the people on the other side of the house, unlike some of her other allies. When Danielle won her first HOH, Jessica was in the middle of the house, since the other side wanted her vote for the Eric boot, and Jessica told her alliance the plan, which caused them to throw it before the veto was even played. So Eric ends up staying, and she wins HOH, where she's intended on targeting Danielle, who she sees as her biggest threat. But Dick saved his daughter, and America's player ended up having her showmance keep him in the house. She is in a new alliance with the Donatos and Eric, which does keep them safe during Danielle's second HOH, and she ends up nominating Amber and Zach, where she is planning on backdooring Danielle, but we know that production did not allow Eric to use the veto to make that happen. She knew that the Donatos were after them, and knew that it was better for herself to work with Amber and Jamaica, hence her maintaining her relationships with them, even after blindsiding them. And she was also evicted due to the AFP twist, so she was screwed over in that element, and she would have done better without it in the season. Jessica is a lot sharper strategically than given credit for, is good at competitions, and great socially, which is why I can see her doing well in most seasons, or just as well. At 6th is Lane from Big Brother 12. Honestly, I was very shocked with how I felt about Lane as a player ending the season, since I didn't feel that way about him during my prior watches of the season. Lane is brought into the Brigade Alliance because he fit the archetype that they really want to work with, and he spent a majority of the first half of the game just being a good, supportive ally, and making other relationships with people in the house. I will say that Lane is not much of a strategist, and while he was an active member of an alliance, he just supported what they wanted, which caused him to not overplay, which is a good trait to have. People perceive him as a floater, though of course the people using that were using the wrong definition, and I'm clearly referring to Brendan, since Lane wasn't floating, but he was just really safe. What caused me to bump him up is that he was the only person in the alliance, outside of Hayden, who was actively planning on turning on the brigade, since he knew that he would beat Brittany at the end and would have trouble beating his other allies, and he was one of the two people who are self-interested, which is a very good trait, and it's something that Enzel lacks, and I don't see him overplaying like Matt did. Lane wasn't really good in competitions, despite just winning an HOH in the final 5. I think he is competent in the strategy element and is very good socially, where I don't ever see a case where he goes before mid-jury on any season. At 5th is Shelly from Big Brother 13. I'm sure that before the season started, most people didn't expect Shelly to be a power player, with her being in the middle of the newbies and the veterans for the first week, but siding with the veterans by the end of the week since they were less chaotic, and obviously they're more known as players, meaning they know how the game works. Shelly was close to Adam out of the newbies, and then her relationships with Jeff and Jordan really put her in a good position with the veterans, as she had a lot of the information within the house and passed it around to whomever she wanted, whenever and wherever she felt like it. Shelly kissed butt to whomever was in power and made a bunch of fake deals with people, and while it kept her safe with everyone, people did see what she was doing. It started to backfire at around the 6th week, since Porsche calls her out on her gameplay, and this was due to the information Rachel gave her, so Shelly goes at it with Rachel. She then decides to flip against Jeff and Jordan, since they were the biggest threats, and she wants to go to the end, so she sides with Kalia, Porsche, who she hated, and Danielle, to boot Jeff and Jordan. Her plan would have continued to work as the other veterans left, but due to the duo's twist being brought back and them giving Rachel the same competition that she won previously, screwed Shelly. Shelly showed the shrewdness, adaptability, and had some good social skills, though she was more emotional than I remembered, and obviously her competitions, or being competitive in that element, was her weaker suit. And the final person in this tier at 4th is Eric from Big Brother 8. As we all know, he is the only player in Big Brother history who essentially had no agency of his own game, due to being forced to make the moves America wanted from him. We see him work on a social game in the beginning of the season, as he had relationships with pretty much everyone in the house, though he was in the late night Jamboree crew. Due to having to make moves that America wanted, he had to push for Kale to be targeted, and had to vote her out twice, which was not what he wanted. This caused the banner to be flown over the HOH competition, which exposed his game, and then the Donatos started targeting him, which was caused by that. While he did have the votes to stay, a lot of his messiness prior, like how he trashed Amber to Dick, was used against him, and it put him in even more danger than he already was. After that, Jessica went to the HOH, told by America to target Dustin, which he does not want that whatsoever, so he makes an alliance with himself, Jessica, and the Donatos, which controls the next few weeks. He and Jessica knew that a move needed to be made against the Donatos on our second HOH, and he wins the veto, but production does not allow him to use the veto. With that move, his hands are tied, and he went out like right afterwards. What he did without having true agency was very impressive, as he was able to move with America's requests to move the game, and he really did have the social and strategic influence, but I do think that America helped keep him in line regarding his pacing, since he also got into some messy situations where, if he had full agency, I don't know if he would have been able to get out of them. So the bronze prize of 3rd goes to Andy from Big Brother 15. I think that Andy is the best player of his archetype, or that's what I'm thinking right as I'm continuing with this rewatch of Big Brother up to this point, which could end once I complete all of the seasons, and my opinion can change about that. Anyways, Andy was not empowered during the first week, but he was building a lot of relationships with people while laying low during the first several weeks. Andy flipped the house at the end of the second week, I'll correct it. He was a part of flipping the house at the second week and found himself in the majority alliance, but he was not on the bad side of the other side of the house, so he was safe on all levels. Andy would leave all of his stuff in the rooms of the house so he can pick things up and to use that as an excuse to get involved in any conversation that's happening. He was the main one who stopped all of the flips on Amanda in the middle portion of the season since she was such a huge shield for him, and Andy ended up winning the HOH where everyone thought that he was good with them, so he just took out the common target in Jesse to not piss anyone off. He started the downfall of Helen by telling Miranda that she was after them and stopped giving Helen information, and he then did the same thing with Miranda 2 weeks later. Setting Alyssa up for his vote in the double was a masterclass, and then forming the Exterminated Alliance, where he just dominated strategically, socially, and competitively. I think Andy would do well, or about just as well, in most seasons if he were to return, or if he was randomly thrown in there, since some people generally do underestimate him, and he doesn't stand out in the crowd while being extremely self-aware. But why he is here and not higher on this tier is I don't know if he would be able to be as flexible if he was on a more tight-knit structure, or a season with a more tight-knit structure. At second is Hayden from Big Brother 12. He fit in the same archetype as a Drew and arguably even a Jason, but I think what has him ahead of the others is that he is more consistent with his strategy, choices, and isn't as wishy-washy as the other two are, or easily influenced in comparison. Hayden was able to win the first HOH and made good moves in targeting the isolated Shermans and the person that everyone knew was the Saboteur, and also was a part of the Brigade Alliance. He was able to have Kristen, who also helped him with people who was not in the Alliance for the next few weeks, and the only reason why his spot got so much blown up was because Andrew went crazy on Kristen, and it had nothing to do with him. After Kristen goes, Hayden gets more focused again, gets closer with Lane, and especially Enzo, to the point where they become a duo, pull Brendan on the side when Rachel is booted, and really kicks his gear up a notch. He plants the seeds against Matt, recognizing that he's the bigger threat, and due to tightening his relationships with his other allies, it was Hayden's game to win once Matt was booted. He was great in competitions, which we saw him dominate during the endgame, was strong socially, even despite the mess with Kristen, and has a sharp strategic mind. He seems to be the most well-rounded player of his archetype up to this point in Big Brother history, and his archetype generally tends to do very well in Big Brother more often than not, so I could easily see him repeating this run. And first place goes to Dan from Big Brother 10 and Big Brother 14. This really should not surprise anyone, as Dan came in with a sweet strategy of coming in to appear as a weaker, meek competitor, so people would leave him alone. While he got into an alliance with Brian and Ollie, it immediately blew up, and he continued with his rep of throwing competitions, while building relationships with everyone in the house, where he worked on getting in the house's good side, where a lot of them relied on him as an ally and a vote to flip against others. Of course, there was the flip vote where he kept Memphis due to America, though he would have kept Memphis anyways if it was just his own choice, and was given a brand new alliance, where he was in the best position within that group and within the house. His side of the house started dominating during the second half of the season, then actually decided to win a bunch of competitions from week 6 onwards, and once the outsiders were gone, the way the alliance was structured had an onion effect, which is why he and Memphis were able to go to the end, and he won over Memphis due to having the better social game and not playing him strategically while having much better jury management. In Big Brother 14, he repeats his initial strategy of throwing competitions to appear weaker, and did build relationships, but since he was a coach, he had to spend a lot of time working on Danielle, teaching her, and essentially manipulating her. Once he came in as a player, he continued with the alliance that would become the Quack Pack, and they did dominate until Frank won the HOH in the early jury after the double, where Dan had to come up with a scheme that would cause him to escape certain eviction. After that, he played a very selfish game where he cut Frank after swearing on the Bible, and then making the move of having Danielle veto him, without telling her that he was going to boot Shane, which was his only obstacle to getting to the final 2. Dan was always very self-interested, and is good at competitions, while throwing many of them in his 2 seasons. And while his social game was good in his first season, it was very sloppy in his second season, though that could also be attributed to the anti-returning bias that was happening in that season. We have seen Dan adapt to his situation several times in 2 seasons, and he's just extremely well-rounded. So that is my overall game player tier ranking of everyone from the second era of Big Brother, which I call the post-classic era, which is from Big Brother 8 to Big Brother 15. So the next video like this that I'm going to make is where I cover the third era, or the modern era, which in my opinion starts with Big Brother 16 and ends with Big Brother 22, so I'll cover all 7 of those seasons and then rank them. So Big Brother 18 should be finished soon, so that will be the next video I post after this. And I might make a challenge video soon, so expect that to come out. And I am working on the season review of the new Total Drama season. I watched it when it leaked, but I couldn't find a lot of the same links. So now that it's actually airing on TV, I'm getting more links. So I am working on that, and that should be done soon. So anyways, thank you all for following me on this journey. You can follow me on my Twitter, which will be linked above, or you can click on my page, and it will be there on my YouTube channel. And I'll be back soon. Okay, so take care.